Monsoon season has arrived beautifully into Mexico, and the middle Rio Grande Valley has gotten some great rains, but the drought isn't over. Early this month, our land executive producer Laura Paskus interviewed Jason Kasuga, chief engineer at the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. He says even after monsoon rains, farmers, as well as the river itself, will continue to face tough times this year and certainly again in future years.
If farmers were to, say, lose their crops or orchards this year due to a lack of water, what sorts of resources, are we already at the point where we need to be talking about what people need to do this year?
Yeah, well, I think the resources that we have in terms of helping folks right now are limited in terms of can we pay them if they lose their crop. I'm hoping that folks who are investing in crops are going through the appropriate analysis to determine crop insurance and those kinds of things. I do think that could be a topic of conversation as we get into the next legislative session. One thing I think that you're aware of is at the last 30-day session there was about $15 million given to the Middle Rio Grande Valley to have a temporary fallowing program, which I think is going to be useful, and I know, and this is a hot topic of conversation among farmers. You know, farmers want to farm, right? That's who they are, that's what their livelihood is. And so there is an idea out there, I think, that we want to, that if we fallow land, then it'll just stay fallow forever. And I don't think that's the intent of the program. The intent of that program is, I think, to give options to farmers. And I think my hope would be if people consider a program like that, especially in 2023, 2024, and 2025, they would be able to use that money, invest in their farm, make some efficiency improvements and/or invest in some drought infrastructure that would allow them to continue to do what they love. But my job at the district as the CEO and chief engineer, I think, is to provide options to farmers. The fallowing program is optional. But I think that's what we have on the table right now. I think that there's other things that can be visited, but I think those are the programs that we have on the table right now, along with, I think, some of MRGC's internal conservation programs to help farmers with on-farm efficiency improvements.
Mm-hmm. So we touched a little bit on infrastructure. Farmers in Corrales have had a particularly hard year. I won't even try to describe how the siphon works, but can you just kind of lay out what problems are related to the siphon and that infrastructure issue, and what problems are related to simply a lack of water in the river, in the system?
Yeah, so the Corrales community faces and has faced an exceptionally difficult year on top of having drought, right? And the reason for that is a key piece of infrastructure, as you mentioned, called the Corrales siphon. And the simplest way to explain it is that it is an underground pipeline that is underneath the Rio Grande, and it allows us to transport water from the east side of the Rio Grande to the west, and allows us to transport a pretty decent volume of water. That piece of infrastructure is broken and needs rehabilitation. And so MRGCD deployed a pumping operation this season to try to provide some water, knowing that we were going to deliver significantly less than what the siphon could bring underneath the Rio Grande from the east to the west side and deliver to farmers. And so I will say the whole valley faces drought in terms of the length and the availability and the time that we may have water, but Corrales is also facing an infrastructure issue which limits our ability to deliver volume to them while we have water. And that is something that we're very much aware of, that I'm very much aware of. That solution is going forward, but we're probably approaching a time where those pumps won't be operational. The river, we may be diverting water and delivering to other farmers, but the river will have dropped so low that we can't pump out of it anymore. And that's why I say I think Corrales' situation is exceptional, and we're taking every step that we can to fix that piece of infrastructure as soon as we can. But my expectation is there will be a pumping operation next year as well. Hopefully that won't be diesel driven. It'll be electrical pump driven. That will allow us to provide a little more surety of water and more continuous operation. Diesel pumps require a lot of attention. These pumps are also a stone's throw away from the Bosque, so we have to be careful knowing the fire danger that we have. And so I want to be honest, and when I talk to the Corrales community or anybody, I meet them where they are, and I acknowledge that they face an exceptionally difficult year this year and another one next year. And it's hard to hear that. It's hard to see farmers and see the struggles that they're going through. But I do believe the district's doing the best job we can with the resources that we have and the process we need to go through to get that fixed. And at the end of the day, that's another project, Laura, that I'm probably going to have to go seek state or federal funding, because I expect when we get a price tag after we're done doing our engineering analysis, that's going to be larger than what we can generate at the district all by ourselves. So I think we're going to be looking for support from the state and the federal government potentially for the construction project.
Right. So I wanted to touch on rain a little bit. We're all hoping that it'll rain. The forecast certainly in the next week here doesn't look great, very hot and dry. When it rains, my understanding is that the ditches won't just immediately fill and everything will be efficient right away. Can you talk about sort of the fairness issue that I've heard you talk about, and also about how the ditches work when they've been dry and then there's water?
Yeah, so Laura, I think one of the things to remember, because when I talk about rain for the Middle Valley, I also talk about an abundance. We need quite a bit of rain, because when it rains, we need it to make it to the river. And I think that's the first challenge with rain right now, is if it rains in our tributaries, the soil conditions there are so dry that I think the amount of water that actually makes it to the river will be impacted by that, obviously. So one, we need a good amount of rain. And then if it makes it to the river and we're able to divert it, one of the things that we're struggling with at the district and that we are worried about is if these canals sit dry for a long period of time, there's always losses when you kind of recharge a canal, right? The canal is no longer wet. It's now soil and earth that wants to take a portion of this water as well. While the canals sit empty, what moisture is left is often taken up by vegetation that wants to grow. So now trying to keep that vegetation under order. A large part of our vegetation management, especially below the flow line, is dealt with by the water itself, in that nothing grows if it's being drowned by the water. And then the last piece of that is if we have enough water to divert and begin to deliver, some of our systems are extremely long. The district, I think, has approximately 1,200 miles worth of canals, laterals, and drains, and most of that is earthen. Very little of that is concrete. And so the further you get away from the point of diversion, the harder it is for the district to be able to deliver a sustained volume of water to reach farmers further down the system. And so I do think that there's going to be instances where we have a shot of water, we're diverting it and we're delivering it, and not everybody may benefit from that because of just the sheer distance water has to move. And I know that's a fairness issue, but I think the only way I can really explain that is some properties are easier to irrigate because they're closer to the point of where irrigation is. The further you get away from the diversions, the longer the water has to run in a canal. And unfortunately, that's a reality in a system as long as MRGCDs.